I'm Steve Brule with Studio Brule, and this is an introduction to the second part of a video Paul and I recorded in one continuous go. The first section dealt with men's physical health, diet and exercise and that sort of thing. And the video carried on for quite a long time, extending into men's mental health, and so we've split it into two separate videos. This video, we're dealing with men's mental health issues. Paul, did you have anything you want to say as an introduction to this second part of the mental health video?
No, it was a great discussion, which has already happened. It's interesting. We're talking about the discussion we just had at the beginning. So I feel like I'm sort of out of sync with the time. But I think it was a great discussion, and I hope people enjoy it.
And I think, Paul, you're absolutely right. It was a great discussion. And I think that's why it was a good idea to split it up into two different sections, because the tone and feel and focus of the two videos were distinctly different. And for those of you who haven't seen the the physical health part, that's part one of this video. And now we'll get straight into our discussion on men's mental health.
If we're talking overall about men's health, that's a real big part of it. And of course, that's connected to physical health. If you're taking care of yourself, I know, for instance, like I said, putting back on 42 pounds, started feeling like crap mentally. Couldn't produce as much work, couldn't do what I was used to doing, and absolutely no surprise. And even already, as the weight has started to come back off, as I'm eating better, I feel better mentally. That is exactly how that works. But for me, the mental part, especially for men, and especially for red pill men, it is different. Mental health issues are very different. One, most of the guys in our respective audiences know that the mental health industry for men sucks. It's really bad. There's a lot of misandry, a lot of deification of women, the industry itself is geared toward women. So men's mental health is pretty much in their own hands. They have to make it. And one of the things that I've been focusing on a lot lately that we always get chances for is that I think one of the biggest benefits from MGTOW philosophy and being in a long-term relationship, I mean, we could argue all day long whether I could or could not be MGTOW, but aside from that argument, MGTOW philosophy is helpful in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that it's extremely helpful is in self-referencing, is in breaking free of group consensus. And life has a way of presenting opportunities for that all the time. The question of, are we hiding? Because, red pill men, and I expect the small number of red pill women out there, frequently feel like they have to hide who they are. That if wherever they go in a social situation or business situation, or if they're socializing with work people, that if they said who they really were, if they said what was really on their mind, people would hate them. And so a lot of times red pill men feel isolated from the rest of the world. They don't feel connected to blue pill people because they're always, in some ways, hiding who they are. And so it becomes a challenge to assert yourself in the ways that you can. And to stand up for who you are and to live by your values. And it's a difficult, challenging thing. One of the ways that I personally have to, contend with that is even with my own audience. Sometimes I'll say things that angers my audience or parts of my audience. I don't think still on all my videos, I get a very high upvote to downvote ratio. But I will say things that will upset segments of my audience. Recently, there was, this conversation about food. The vegan Nazis go nuts over this stuff, and they always come into the comments with, no, you're prescribing heart attacks for people. This is terrible. Your dick's going to fall off. You're going to become impotent, and all kinds of sky falling, Chicken Little stuff, and contending with them and arguing through it is a part of asserting and standing by my own beliefs. And then I have sometimes that, I'll give an example right now. I just posted from ICMI 18, Karen Strawn's talk is actually a fantastic talk at ICMI. And of course, there's always that small percentage of the audience. They're like, why is a woman speaking about men's issues? You know, she should shut up and get back in the kitchen, or whatever, ignoring the fact that Karen Strawn has probably red-pilled more men than all the rest of us put together. She's led more men to MGTOW with her videos and her work, and ignoring that. And then, and these are guys in my audience that I do value, but I still have to be frank with them and deal with that stuff and stand for my own values. And men get that challenge all the time. And I have a theory that your mental health can be measured proportionally to how much you stand up for your beliefs.
And
And
would you say it's a chicken or egg thing, Paul? Like, are you healthy, therefore you stand up for your beliefs, or do you stand up for your beliefs and then become healthy?
I think you stand up for your beliefs and then become healthy. I mean, there's always that chicken and egg argument that can be made. But my feeling is that standing up, particularly for red pill thoughts, for being anti-gynocentric, for the way we look at the world, that doesn't come natural to men. We're naturally, the inclination is to keep our mouths closed about that, to avoid trouble, to avoid judgment, to avoid being cut off in the bedroom, to avoid, being fired in some cases, simply by stating what you believe. And so I think it's something that almost every red pill guy eventually has to fight through in some way. And sometimes you can't. I mean, I'm not recommending at all that some guy on the job somewhere that's his only livelihood, that he start running his mouth at work and lose his job. I mean, that's pure stupidity. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I am saying that we're always confronted with opportunities and challenges to stand up for who we are, and that it's real easy to get into a rut of just keeping your mouth closed or just keeping your thoughts online under a screen name. And in the end, I think that there's a price to be paid for that too. That your dignity suffers, your self-respect suffers. And for men, when their self-respect suffers, they suffer. For me, there's no two ways about that. So it becomes a challenge of how do you walk through that? How do you pick and choose your battles? When are you going to do it? And, it's no different in my life than it is in anybody else's. I certainly have gone out there on a limb with red pill thoughts in front of the whole world under my real name. But there's still all kinds of opportunities in my life all the time where I have to make a decision. Am I going to say something? Am I not going to say something? And I don't always make the right call. But I do think I make the right call enough that I feel like my self-respect is intact. I don't feel like I'm chickening out of being who I am. I don't think I could live with that. And I don't think most men do live with it very well. So I think that's sort of, there's a million ways to look at mental health, our relationships with women, and all kinds of other ways. But that is one area that's been particularly relevant in my life lately, in choosing when I'm going to say something and when I'm not.
Yeah, picking your battles, that's a very personal judgment call. But to avoid all battles is a big mistake.
It is.
If you keep running away from every battle, you'll be backed into a corner that's not worth living in.
Well, you end up being one of these guys, and here you'll get a comment about this. End up being one of these guys, and this is the way it looks to me, that comes into the comments of one of my videos, and I'm talking about a small fraction of guys, not anywhere near most of my audience, but there's always a guy in the audience there, fucking women are cunts. They're all whores. You can't trust any of them. They're all bullshit. They'll all steal from you. I don't think that's a guy that's being who he is in other places.
So you think he's kind of venting himself out of frustration at that moment?
I think he's walking around bottled up all the time, maybe feeling like he's taking shit, keeping his mouth shut. And he gets online where you can be an anonymous person, and then it just blah, it just comes gushing out.
Yes,
Uh,
explodes out uncontrolled, and yeah, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
and then it ends up just looking dickish. It doesn't, it doesn't look like the thoughtful part of red pill philosophy that really is enlightening and has a lot of freedom for men. It looks just like somebody trapped in their anger.
Yeah, it does sound like someone who maybe has been treated badly by a woman or somebody out there, and instead of confronting that person, it may be chronic and ongoing at that moment even, um, instead of going and finding a healthy way to confront the person with that woman with that injustice and explain it, or maybe doesn't have the words or the capacity or the understanding of how to do that. But then he sees an opportunity here to say, oh, all women are, you know.
Oh, and it can be a guy that has confronted a woman and ended up in jail. I mean, it's not like these guys aren't coming by their anger honestly.
Right.
They've got real reasons to be pissed, and I'm not arguing against the anger. I think, I've written and done talks on red pill rage and red pill isolation. I think it's a very real phenomenon, and it has very, very honest roots that we need to respect and pay attention to. It just doesn't help the individual when they're railing against, sort of like throwing punches in the air.
Yeah.
It just doesn't help them very much. And usually what does help in those circumstances is having an environment, a place in their lives where they can sit down and a little more calmly talk about why they're pissed off, why they're hurt. Because like I said, this stuff is real. These guys, a lot of them, have been screwed over so bad.
Paul, I want to go back to something you said earlier on, is that the whole mental health industry is really geared around women and excludes or even makes men's lives worse when you get involved in that industry. And I've had that experience.
Yep.
And this, we're talking about anger here, and anger is a particularly difficult one in our culture, because anger, when somebody expresses anger in our culture, often they're blamed for being a bad person because they're angry. And I don't think we hardly ever get to the point where we say, what are you angry about? No, anger is the only thing that's dealt with. And and the man who vents his anger is typically met with even more problems and accusations for being angry. And the issues that brought up the anger never get to the surface, never get talked about.
You painted the perfect picture. That's our mental health industry as it stands right now. And, despite being 30 years in that industry and probably 15 to 18 of those years I spent trying to tell other clinicians, yeah, he's angry. Why don't you ask him why?
Well, Paul, how does
And
the mental health industry come to the point of picking out one valid human emotion out of all the others and say, this one is bad? If you express this one, which is anger in this case, you're a bad person. And that's essentially the message that all men get.
well, yeah, and it's a gendered problem. It's not when women express anger in therapeutic settings, it's you go girl. It's
Right.
like that's empowerment. It's, that's righteous indignation coming out of a woman's mouth. She's pissed and she's telling the world, and we need to we reinforce that for her and pat her on the back and encourage her to do more of it, because that's empowerment. And when men do it, we see them as dangerous.
Yeah.
And we
Bad
see
people
them as
accused of bad.
mentally unhealthy or bad.
Yeah.
And we get dismissive about it. Oh, he's just angry. I mean, and I can get on the border of doing that with guys myself, because it's tempting. when somebody's anger appears irrational, when it appears to be going nowhere, when there doesn't appear to be an open door with that individual to talk more constructively about what's hurt them or what's made them angry, then it is easy to just say, screw it. There's no dealing with this person. But the fact of the matter is, that's a temptation we shouldn't take.
Paul, this woman years ago came out with these stages of dying, or I forget her name now.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
There you go. And she identified, it was sort of denial, negotiation.
Denial, then anger. Then bargaining.
And then depression and acceptance.
Then grief or depression, and then acceptance.
Now, what do you think would happen? And I'm guessing that an injury and recovering from an injury, and I'm including mental injuries or something that causes this anger, might have some of those same elements to progress through towards mental health. Now, if you say you pick anger and you're not allowed to express this one, doesn't that destroy the whole process and the person cannot then proceed to mental health? You not have to go through the phase of anger.
It's worse than that. Let me give you an example. I worked with a family a long time ago, and there had been a death. And during the grieving process, the man in the family, his father was the one who had died. And this was a head of household. And he had a wife, and he had 3 kids and some extended family. And they were all concerned about him. And they wanted an intervention because he wasn't, they just knew something was wrong, that something that he wasn't, that his reaction to the death of his father was uncharacteristic of him. And he was moping a lot, and he was not motivated to do stuff with his children. And all it was is that he was grieving. That's the only thing that was going on with this guy. He was grieving. And the family wanted to shut that down.
The grieving process.
And the therapist, one of the therapists working with the family, wanted to do the intervention, to send him the message that he was doing something wrong. And all it was normal grief. His father had died. He had a period of sadness, which you might expect. But he wasn't producing. He wasn't being in the role that his family was used to him being in. He wasn't being the husband that his wife wanted. He wasn't being the father that his kids wanted. He wasn't being the cousin, the nephew, the whatever to his extended family members. And so everybody was up in an uproar.
In other words, he wasn't being a good male slave.
Absolutely right.
Doing his job. He was a human being at that point, and they weren't accepting that.
And that is a mild part of the problem, because yes, when anger is, when you go through red pill grief, when you grieve all the blue pill illusions, when you think that you had about women, you get angry. There's a part of that is a grief process. And when you experience other losses in life and you go through stuff, but when men get angry, it's often cathartic, as it should be for any other human being. But the mental health profession tends to see men's anger as unhealthy and dangerous. And they want to go in and stop it.
So they're actually preventing men's progress towards a healthier state of mind.
Absolutely. And now keep in mind that it's also, I think, practical and sensible to point out to guys that are angry, that are going through grief, that this is a part of grief, to have them acknowledge that they're angry, and to be able to talk about that, and to talk about, my father and I had unfinished business and the son of a bitch died. and now I'm pissed off. Perfectly normal, healthy feeling. But if the guy's going around bouncing off the walls with the anger, then you should try to work with him to get him to center and understand where he's at. Because understanding where you're at in any of those 5 stages of grief helps facilitate moving to the next stage. But you don't get it by just saying, you're angry, be quiet.
Yeah.
And what
That's
the mental health field does,
process, right?
yeah, what the mental health field does is it tells women that angry men who are angry are dangerous. Stay away from them. It tells men that are angry that they're dangerous, that they're doing something wrong, that they shouldn't feel this way. And they mock and humiliate them. Oh, you're just angry. You're just an angry man. That's what our mental health professionals do. A lot to men, and it's absolutely incredibly abusive.
Mm. Well, I'm glad we got this topic up there, because I think this is really important, that men realize that their anger has a reason, and that you're not a bad person or an antisocial person, or you shouldn't be rejected from society because you're going through a period of anger. But you should examine that anger and determine what it is that making you angry. What are you angry about? And maybe that can be turn into a, like, for me, I was really pissed off at my court experience in family court, and that's a part of why I'm doing this work today.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for other men, there may be some similar thing. What has really destroyed or threatened your life and caused you to be angry may end up being your life's work, the most important work you do in your life.
I think it was with me too. I think that there's fundamentally a part of my anger at injustice. Even it wasn't even necessarily on me. I mean, there's family of origin stuff involved in there and everything else. But I think it's part of it for most of us in movements. When you're part of a movement for change, there's probably some element of anger driving it, and that is a good, healthy thing. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that men can become stuck in anger. And you see that if you look online, you see it a lot. Guys that are,
and women as well, right? Anybody can get stuck in it.
Yeah, and I hate to be callous, but I'm like, I don't care about the women. They got all the mental health help they need.
True enough.
Not my problem. Whatever they need, go get it. But I see men stuck in anger. It becomes their only friend. It becomes the only place that they're safe, because when you're angered, you're welled up, you're well defended. You've got these walls up, and nobody can hurt you the way they did before. And when I see men get trapped in that, I worry for them because there is a destructive price for that. That can cost you a lot. It can undermine your happiness long term.
What should these men do, Paul? If they feel that they're getting stuck in anger, they've been angry for a long, long, long time.
I think just understanding, if you understand that you're stuck in anger, I mean, most guys that are stuck in anger are not aware of it. They're just thinking, goddamn right, yeah, I'm pissed off. I got every reason to be. And, you can't argue with them because they're right about that. But if you talk to a guy in June and he's pissed off and goddamn it, I'm pissed off and fuck women and fuck that, and then you see him again in March and he's saying the same things with the same inflection, the same tone, he's telling you he's gone nowhere internally.
And if he hasn't done anything about the issues he's complaining about.
And you don't do things about issues when you're stuck in anger. And I think just the knowledge, it's not like, hey, you need counseling or you need to go to therapy. And I don't recommend people go to therapy anyway. It's like I said, it's a bullshit profession. But understanding, coming to terms with, and just accepting I am stuck in anger can help a man move out of it. Because once he has that consciousness of where he's at, he begins to entertain the idea that he might ought to be somewhere else. and then more of the grieving process can take over, and he can become unstuck and move on. So I think all that really most men need is to be fully aware that they're stuck and they're not going anywhere.
Is that not a part of being fully aware of whatever emotion that you're having at any given time? Like anger is, to me, is one of many emotions that we will experience every day. You experience various emotions.
Yep.
And if the fact that you get stuck at that one is an issue. I want to touch on one thing there that just came to mind as we were talking about this, and especially the mental health industry, as to why they are so keen to repress or deny the expression of, or even the existence of, men's anger. Is it possible that there's an unconscious desire to prevent men from vocalizing about the injustices of men in society? If men are allowed to speak their mind and what they're angry about, they will start to speak about the injustices that we are talking about all the time. And if enough men do that, that's a huge problem for the people who benefit from our culture.
I think there may be some truth to that. I honestly think it's more along the lines that any individual man, I mean, forget the issues on the global scale, but that any individual man who's angry, most therapists will say, okay, we need to send you to anger management. Not tell me what you're angry about. Tell me what hurt you. Tell me who stuck the knife in your back and twisted. Who did this to you? Because you can really help people relieve anger by having that conversation with them, just by letting them have an audience for that anger. But I think really what it is with men for the most part, and we see this in the therapeutic profession because most of them are women, is when you're listening to an angry man, the average woman, let's say she's mid-30s, PhD type, been through a couple of long-term relationships, and if she heard what was really on the mind of a man, she would be hearing somebody talk about the exact shit that she's pulled in relationships her whole life.
Wow.
And that, I think, is one of the number ones. And men, often therapists don't want to hear men's anger, because men who are therapists often, like lots of men, have a ton of anger they haven't even gotten close to. And you start hearing men talk about their anger, it scares everybody. Not because the anger's dangerous, but because the anger makes you face yourself. You hear men talking about their, why do you think that they work so hard to shut MRAs down?
They don't want to hear. They don't want to hear what men's side of the story.
We tell the world how bigoted it really is. We tell the world how hypocritical it is, how bullshit it is, how callous that the world is, how insensitive, how indifferent it is to suffering, while they're running around virtue signaling, talking about how compassionate and great they are. And MRAs point at that and say, that's bullshit, here's why. And the world doesn't want to hear that, because the world is a hypocritical place, full of mistreatment. And your audience is just as guilty of it as the people who did it to you that got you angry. That's part of the problem.
And the mental health industry, are they not doing that very same thing?
To me, it is, and it's like I've told this story a time or two before. When I started asking basic sensible questions like, why aren't we assessing women for whether or not they're being abusive? We assessed all the men to try to find out. Why aren't we asking questions of these women? Because, by the way, I got a client that had 20 stitches in his head from being slammed over the head with a fireplace poker by his wife. And we're not asking these guys if their wives are being abusive, or we're not asking the women that come here if they're being abusive. Why aren't we doing that? The reaction that I got from my coworkers and from the administration there was the most hostile you could possibly imagine. How dare I even ask that kind of question? What do you hate women?
Obviously, that's
Obviously,
right.
I was concerned about, maybe their children getting abused. Maybe there's a lot of abuse going on in families we don't know about. And so if I ask about that, of course, that means I hate women.
Yeah.
That would be my only reason for asking, right? And this was, man, long before I knew what a red pill was. I was just digging into Warren Farrell's work and starting to ask questions. And the first thing I heard from other people when I asked the most fundamental, reasonable questions was, why do you hate women?
Yeah.
That's
Paul, do
why
you
we
think it's
don't want
gotten any
men to
better
keep.
since then? Do you think it's gotten any better since then?
No, no, maybe a little, maybe a little. I mean, I think we've finally gotten the narrative dented enough out there that even feminist therapists can't have a hard time sitting there convincing themselves that men don't have issues and that they shouldn't be angry. Um, and so I think maybe it's helped a little, but it is still, on a scale of, 1 to 10 in terms of sickness, it's still a 9.
Yeah, I
It's
tend to agree with
horrible.
you on that. Yeah.
I couldn't recommend it to anybody, and I don't recommend it to women either. Because, by the way, ladies, enabling your sick behavior is not therapeutic help. It's not, and that's what they get in a lot of cases is absolute enabling of their mistreatment of others. That's what we see with borderline so much. So no, I don't think it's better. I think the only thing, and it's why I stress in my work all the time, Steve, your life is in your hands. Your mental health is in your hands. There is no real great help. I mean, I have a counseling practice online, and I talk to people, and it's short term, and we stick with the facts, and we don't drag it out, and we try to look for some practical answers. But the bottom line is your mental health is that you got to take care of it, because this world is against men being mentally healthy. We need men to be compliant. We need men to do what they're told and to keep their mouth shut about the pain they're in and the suffering they go through. They need to keep that shit to themselves and be obedient slaves. And that's what the mental health profession wants. That's what the legal profession wants. That's what family courts want. That's what the media want.
And that's what the workforce, the businesses want to. They want compliant workers show up, do the job, go home, and not cause trouble.
Absolutely. And the only thing that'll deflect them from that mission at all is the presence of a woman in the workforce, and then everything changes. Oh, we have women here now, so here's the new rules.
And those new rules only apply to the women in the workforce.
Yes. Well, the rules about, watch your mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like Victorian age crap of, know how to treat a lady. Here comes your equals. Now stand up when she comes in the room and offer her your chair. So what can I say? It's funny you brought up talking about anger. It's really hard not to be angry about this stuff, but
Yeah.
it is important to be more than just angry. You have to be more than angry.
If a guy feels he's angry and starting to look at why and say he's got a handle on what he's angry about, what's his next step?
Ask yourself where you want to go. I mean, if you think about it, you can look at, Steve brought up Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work on death and dying. And what she did, she interviewed and she talked to a lot of people going through the process of losing their lives. And she came up with this 5-stage model of, first is shock and denial. When they tell you you have terminal cancer, you don't want to believe it. You're just in shock. And then you get angry. And then you bargain. And that's where people pray and ask God, I'll be a better person if you cure me, if I'm relieved of this. And they bargain with themselves. And then they finally recognize that's not going to work. And they get into the depth of their pain. And then finally on to acceptance, where they understand what's happening and in their way, okay with it. Well, you go through that process with everything. When you go from being blue pill to red pill, you're grieving the loss of blue pill life. You're grieving every idea you ever had that if you were just really nice and took good care of a woman, that she wouldn't stab you in the back. That's what men go into relationships with. And then they have a huge piece of grief work to get when they figure out that the sugar and spice fallacy is what bit them. They really thought that when they went in that family court, that if they just brought the truth with them and if they were decent and tried to make a fair deal and tried to be a grown-up about it, that somehow the system would treat them right. Well, they got to grieve that too, because the system rolls over guys like that like a steamroller. And so when they're recognized they're angry after the shock wears off, and then their anger starts getting to them, they're going to have to get into the pain of the loss. That's what the anger is preventing them from feeling. When you're really, really angry, you don't feel the pain of the loss. You're guarded. Your defenses are up. Your emotions are walled up. Everything is. And then when you have to let that anger go, then you feel the pain of the loss. And it's not pretty. It's ugly. It's painful. But that's what we go through on our way to acceptance. It's just real easy for men to get stuck in the anger, especially when we have communities of men online that recirculate that anger all the time. And it's understandable. I'm not criticizing guys for feeling angry, but when you decide that you don't want to be trapped in that anger anymore, when you want to get past into it, then the thing to do is to open yourself up to the fact that the grief is something still to go through.
Okay, so the guys should be willing to grieve then.
Yes.
There's an unwillingness to grieve. Are you suggesting? What's
grieving hurts?
What's hard? Why is grief harder than moving into grief? Why is that harder than the anger?
I think for the red pill stuff, for the type of anger we're talking about, you're talking about a lifetime of illusion of what you always thought women were, of what you always thought love was, what you thought a relationship should be, what you thought a marriage should be. These are these hugely iconic things in the lives of men. They involve age-old archetypes of we have this picture in marriage of our head, and men have, and don't let anybody tell you that men aren't romantic, because they are. They have ideas. Well, man, I'll love her and take care of her and she'll be true to me. And then 7 years into the relationship, about the time the guy hits peak income, she may start screwing the pool boy. Well, that's a whole lot that's been shattered with that. It's not just he got cheated on. It's everything he ever grew up thinking about his future, every plan he ever had. And so it's like you're going from one life, one existence, one reality into something else totally alien. And most of this stuff catches guys by surprise.
And it's not necessarily just his specific. You were alluding to the fact that the moving to red pill is to look a hard, close look at the fallacies you assumed were true about all of that. Not just your specific situation, but the whole reality of life.
Absolutely.
The whole paradigm destruction.
And
let me ask you this.
Yeah, okay.
Go on. By being angry, isn't there an element of clinging to that belief still? You're angry that yours was shattered, but you're still kind of clinging to it. You want it to be true.
Yeah, because you haven't grieved it. It doesn't become totally real until you've grieved it and then hit that final stage of acceptance. You're still struggling against it.
Now, to get grief, telling somebody they have to grieve, I mean, that's not going to go sell well, right? Who wants to get all depressive and grief? But if you
Sure.
can say, like, if you're telling somebody, okay, you need to accept the new reality, yeah, you're pulling them past through the grief from the point of acceptance. Or like, this is where you want to go. You want to tell that guy, look, you want to start to accept this. Of course, he's not going to go straight to acceptance. He's going to hit that wall of grief on the way.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't really matter so much. I mean, I understand what you're saying. As a sales pitch, it's a terrible one. But the fact of the matter is that that is where we all have to go through. We all do have to go through that grief. And I think it's better, honestly, to be frank about it, to be honest about it and open about it. And keep in mind also that with most people, this stuff happens whether you ever talk to them or not, whether anybody ever talks to them. They'll go through that process on their own with no help, no interference from anybody, no lectures, no conversations. They'll just do this thing. But if they're going to get over that knife in the back that life delivers, most men at some point or another, they're going to have to grieve.
Yeah.
They're going to have to experience the sadness that everything I thought about this woman in particular, about all women, about life, about marriage, about relationships, all of it was bullshit. All of it was a lie. This is really dangerous ground we're in. Marriage is dangerous ground. Here the guy thought it was, something he was supposed to do that would ultimately be good for him. Letting go of that, you begin to see why there's so much anger in men. And for some of them, for a percentage of them, they will get stuck there, and some of them, sadly, will never get out of it.
Never get through the anger.
Right.
When you're counseling guys, that are stuck in anger, for instance, do you tell them, okay, you have to grieve, or do you tell them we have to move you to accepting the new reality?
I tell them, tell me why you're angry. Tell me who hurt you. Mm-hmm. Tell me the story of it. And then tell me again. And then tell me any parts that you feel like you left out. And then again, I want to hear it again. I want them to talk about it. I want them to walk through that. And when they've exhausted that for me, then I'll ask them, where do you want to go with this? I mean, the inference being, obviously, you just don't want to stay, super pissed off, high blood pressure the rest of your life. What do you want to do? How do you want to go about reclaiming your life? I don't say, here's the 5 stages, now you need to do this.
Right.
But I try to maintain an awareness of what stage they're in. And if they're angry, I want them to talk. And if they're talking to me for 10 sessions and they're still saying the same exact thing that they were in the first session, then I'm going to start asking about whether or not they want to stay this way.
And what's happened in the past? Like, how's guys' response when you say, where do you want to go with this? What's a typical response, or is there a typical response?
There's not really. I've had a response, everything from, well, I want my life back. I want my self-respect back. I want to feel like I can eat and pay my bills again, because what divorce does to a lot of guys. And everything from that to guys telling me, what the fuck do you mean? What I want to do with this? You tell me what to do. I'm paying you. You tell me. Yeah.
They genuinely don't know then sometimes. They genuinely don't know what to do. The guys themselves, like some of these guys just don't know what to do or what about it.
And a lot of times guys come to me very, very close to the grief. When they're ready to grieve is when some guys will seek out somebody to talk to. When they've been angry, they've been shocked, and they've been going in circles with this nightmare that's happened in their life over and over and over again. And then they reach out. A lot of times those guys are just primed to start moving on and experiencing the pain of the loss and trying to get through it. But you never know. There's not a rubber stamp or a mold for any of this. You never know how it's going to happen, but that is how it happens sometimes.
Some of these guys, do you feel, are benefiting and actually move on and rebuild their lives?
I think they can benefit. I mean, I have questions in my mind. I think sometimes, it's helpful just to have somebody to talk to that's not telling you to shut up. Because a lot of these guys, they don't feel, and for damn good reason, they don't feel like anybody's listened to them. You know, they try to complain in court, the judge tells them to shut up. They try to complain to their wives or ex-wives, they get told to shut up there. They try to frequently complain to their own families, and their families will start telling them to shut up, that they don't want to hear it. And they'll say, well, you married her. I mean, there's just all kinds of things that happen where guys get the message that the world doesn't want to hear their pain. And I think it's helpful in that way to do it. But I don't think therapy is what gets people through this. It may be something they happen to employ along the way, but I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's an absolute necessity. It may be something that a guy really enjoys, and that he does it to feel better and to vent a little bit. But ultimately, that process of going from shock and denial all the way to acceptance, that happens with 98% of people, no matter what. Sometimes it takes a little longer, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes, every once in a while, you'll get somebody stuck in anger, or they'll get stuck in bargaining. I mean, I knew a guy, he was a close friend of mine. He's passed away now. But he was a very dear friend for 25 years. And 15 years after his divorce, he was still begging his ex-wife for attention and approval.
Mm.
And he was stuck in bargaining.
He never got over that.
Yeah, he wasn't angry. And then he would call me and say, Paul, I went over to her house and washed her car. And when I was done, she wouldn't even let me come in the house. She told me she had plans and to go away. Can you believe she did that? And I'd say, yeah, I can. I'm just shocked that you can't believe it. But he was still bargaining. He was still saying, if I just do this, she'll love me again. She'll accept me again. And, you know, I'm a counselor, and he was a counselor, and he knew this stuff. And it didn't save him. It didn't help. So it's like there's nobody has the power to help you. I mean, you can allow somebody to help you a little bit, but, you know, regardless of what anybody does trying to sell you therapeutic services, they can't make you grieve. They can't make you get from point A to point B. It's a very lonely journey. And the most you can hope to do as a counselor is to sit next to somebody while they do some of it and to not abandon them. That's the very most that they can get out of it. It's just,
sorry, go ahead.
Just one of those unfortunate realities.
And this has been a very, very insightful and good conversation. I'm glad we went down this road. It's certainly a long conversation, but I think it's an important conversation, and you've provided a lot of very profound insight there.
Well, if it's helpful to anybody, I'm glad to know that.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking, I'm thinking, well, it's kind of like losing weight or any other thing you do, going to the gym. Nobody can do it for you. You're going to have to go through the weight loss process yourself. You're going to have to, if you're going to go get fit, you're going to have to go to the gym yourself. And it seems like from what you're saying, if on the road to mental health, you can have somebody talking to you about it, how sort of accompanying you along the way, but you have to walk the road yourself, right?
You have to walk the road yourself. You know, we're born alone and we die alone and we grieve alone. And it's one of our fantasies in life is that we don't do that the families are there for this, that people are there for us. And sometimes they are, or sometimes they're in the same room. But the process of grieving a loss like a marriage or a death or, you know, losing a child because of parental alienation. I mean, this is one of the things I talk to guys about a lot in my practice, is where they're still suffering is that they haven't seen their kid in 3 years. And it's just ripping their hearts out. I mean, it's a pain that you can't even begin to quantify. And that too is another part of grief, you know. And how do you tell a guy you have to grieve the loss of your child, almost like they died? Because a lot of times that's what guys have to do. They don't have a choice. The court's not giving them a choice. The mother's not giving them a choice. The world is rallied against them. And the best you can do is try to do what you can to help them move a little bit further down the road toward wholeness again. And the good news is that even with tragic losses like that, men can recover their lives. And we're talking a lot and sort of a downer of a conversation, but men are incredibly resilient. It's amazing what they go through. The toughness that we breed in men pays off for them in the end. They can reclaim their lives. A lot of guys that feel like, well, I just can't go on. If I could never see my kid, I just couldn't go on. Yes, you can. You absolutely can. People do it. It's terrible, it's hard, but people do it. And they go on to have lives that are at least somewhat fulfilling. You just can't give up on yourself.
Well, Paul, this is, we got into some very deep and important issues on this talk. Everything.
It's been a good conversation. I'm glad you asked the questions you did.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you responded with such honesty, such integrity. I think there's a lot of men that would be helped by hearing your thoughts on these issues.
I can only hope.
Well, I think, Paul, it's quite a long talk here. We should probably wrap it up. And I hope we can get together in another week or so. And
let's do that.
Continue our conversation on all things related to men's health.
Sounds good.
And for viewers out there, I want to reiterate, if you have experience you want to share with us, we really like to hear about it. You can either send an email or put a comment in the comments. The email is more reliable. I might miss a comment or two. And maybe join us on a show to share some of your experiences in physical, mental, or financial health related to men. So that's it for tonight. And thanks, Paul, for joining me. And thank you, everyone here, for sticking with the video.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Steve.